In the heart of a brutal winter storm, a lonely water tower on a snowy hill held a secret no one in Riverton expected. What if the man they feared the most was the one holding the only light of hope? And what if a loyal German shepherd was the true link between life and death? When the town went silent under endless snow. Today, you will follow the journey of Adam and Buddy as they turn fear into faith and strangers into a community. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below and subscribe. Winter pressed itself against the old water tower on the hill as if trying to swallow the structure whole. Snow wrapped the metal legs in a thick white coat, and the wind from the northern ridge howled across the frozen valley. The sky above the town of Riverton stayed a pale gray from morning to night. Each gust of air carried sharp, icy grains that scraped against steel and froze on contact. The hill was always colder than the town below, and the tower stood like a lone sentinel, watching over a world locked in endless winter. Inside the tower lived Adam Walker. He was a man of 40 years, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of lean muscle built from years of physical work rather than exercise for pleasure. His face carried strong angles, a square jaw covered with a short beard that grew unevenly because of an old burn scar from his time deployed overseas. His eyes were a deep hazel, dark enough to seem brown in shadows and bright enough to reflect the cold light of winter in daytime. Those eyes always carried a stillness that did not belong to a man his age. It was the kind of stillness found in soldiers who had seen too much and returned home with more silence inside them than words. His hair was short and dark, flecked early with gray near the temples, because stress had carved its own timeline across his life long before age could catch up. Adam had been a mechanic in the army. Years of crawling beneath armored vehicles in desert heat had shaped his movements into quiet efficiency. When he returned from the war, he found that his skills were useful in Riverton. People would bring their trucks or tractors to him, and he fixed them without complaint. He spoke little and worked with steady hands. But the town never fully welcomed him. They were polite. They paid him. Yet there was always a line in their voices and their eyes, a line that kept him on the outside. And Adam, tired from the weight he carried, never crossed it. The tower had been abandoned before he bought the land with the last of his army savings. Inside, he built a simple life, a metal cot pushed against the curved wall, a small heater that hummed whenever the generator outside had enough fuel, a workbench where he repaired tools for local farmers or fixed radios that reminded him of the only job in the army he had ever loved. And near the door lay the wool blanket that belonged to Buddy. Buddy was a 7-year-old German shepherd with a large frame and thick winter coat the color of tan and deep black. The dog's ears stood tall and alert even when resting. His posture carried both calm and readiness, as if every part of his body understood the responsibility of watching over his owner. His eyes were the warm amber of autumn leaves, and in them lived both patience and sharp intelligence. Adam had adopted him from a rescue shelter the year he returned home. The dog had been underweight then and distrustful of strangers, but he had walked straight toward Adam without hesitation. From that moment, they had belonged to each other. The winter inside Adam's mind was harsher than the one surrounding the tower. Memories of the war did not arrive as full scenes. They came in fragments, a sound of distant artillery that echoed whenever the wind slammed against steel, a flash of movement like a shadow across snow that reminded him of moments when the desert horizon shifted with danger. At night, he sometimes woke to the imagined smell of burning rubber mixed with sand. And on certain nights, when the cold made the tower walls contract with loud metallic pops, he heard voices he once knew, calling for help through broken radios. It was always the same moment, the same helplessness, the same silence after the static. Buddy sensed these storms long before they broke inside Adam. When Adam's breath shortened or his shoulders tightened, Buddy rose from his blanket and pressed his weight gently against Adam's leg. When Adam felt tension rising, he placed his hand on Buddy's head, and the warmth beneath his palm pulled him back into the present. Buddy never barked or whined unless truly necessary. He simply stayed close, loyal, steady, the one constant in Adam's fractured nights. On this particular evening, the wind rattled the tower with relentless force. Snow swept past the windows, coating the glass in white frost. Adam sat near the small stove, repairing a damaged set of pliers for a farmer who needed them before the next thaw. The metal felt icy, even near the fire. Beneath his fingers, the tool clicked into shape, and he nodded with quiet satisfaction. He did not smile often, but when his hands restored something broken, a faint softness touched his eyes. Buddy lay a few feet away, his head resting on his paws, but his gaze fixed on Adam. The dog's tail thumped once against the floor when Adam looked up. It was an unspoken exchange of trust. Adam leaned back in his chair for a moment. He could feel the cold seeping through the tower walls despite the heater. Winter always won in the end. But he had lived here for years and had learned how to survive it. The cold made him focus. The quiet kept him stable, and the isolation kept the noise of the world at a distance. Outside, the snowstorm thickened. The town of Riverton below disappeared into a swirl of white. The distant lights of houses looked like dim stars lost in fog. The world seemed softer from this height, softer and lonelier. Adam stood and walked to the small window slot, wiping the frost with the back of his hand. He looked down at the town with a strange mix of affection and detachment. He worked there. He earned his living there. But he had never truly belonged. The tower was the only place where he felt the silence was allowed to exist. Buddy rose and stood beside him. Adam placed a hand on the dog's neck, feeling the strength beneath the thick fur. Buddy leaned lightly against him, sharing warmth. From up here, the town looked peaceful. But peace was something Adam knew could disappear without warning. War had taught him that. Life after war had taught him something else. Sometimes peace depended on the strength of one person and the constancy of one companion. The wind roared and the night deepened. Snow climbed higher against the metal legs of the tower. Adam returned to his workbench, lit a small lantern, and continued repairing tools until his mind settled into the rhythm that kept him steady. Buddy curled near his feet, his breathing slow and consistent. Together, they created a small island of warmth in the heart of winter. Adam knew that tomorrow he would wake to another day of snow and work and silence. But he also knew that Buddy would be there, watching, guarding, reminding him that he was not alone. In a world that had once taken everything from him, that single truth was enough to carry him through this winter night. Winter morning light settled over Riverton with a cold whiteness that stole all color from the world. The snow across the town square lay untouched, except for the narrow paths carved earlier by townspeople, rushing from one warm doorway to the next. A thin layer of frost clung to the wooden posts of the community hall, and the flag outside barely moved as the wind stiffened it into silence. Winter in Riverton always made the air feel heavier, as if the sky pressed downward with the weight of its own chill. Today, that heaviness stretched through every conversation and every breath as residents stepped inside for the town meeting. Mayor Collins stood near the front of the long wooden table. He was a man in his early 50s with a polished appearance that rarely matched the rugged nature of Riverton. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his clean-shaven jaw showed sharp angles that suggested discipline, though not the kind earned through hard labor. His posture was upright, confident, almost theatrical. Collins believed deeply in order and progress as he defined them, and he preferred the town to reflect a polished image for winter tourists. Beneath his thick coat, he wore a vest and a pressed shirt that looked out of place in a room full of wool sweaters and heavy boots. His voice often carried the tone of someone who assumed agreement before he heard it. Around him gathered the familiar faces of Riverton. Among them stood Jack Morgan, who owned the feed and lumber store. Jack was a large man with a broad chest and heavy steps that made the wooden floor creak. His beard was thick and graying, and his skin carried the reddish tone of someone who spent his days outdoors. Jack was not unkind by nature, but he was quick to form judgments and slow to reconsider them. He believed in tradition and in protecting the town from anything he saw as strange or unnecessary. And to Jack, there was nothing stranger than a lone man living in a rusted water tower on a snowy hill. Sheriff Lewis arrived moments later and closed the door behind him to keep the cold wind from pushing inside. He was a tall man in his 40s, with a calm and thoughtful presence. His hair was sandy brown and slightly unkempt beneath his hat. His face carried lines of responsibility rather than stress, lines created by long nights spent helping stranded travelers and checking on elderly residents during winter storms. His beard grew in a faint shadow across his chin, giving him a rugged but approachable look. Unlike the mayor, he dressed in worn boots and a thick sheriff coat patched at the elbows. His voice was steady and level, the kind of tone that lowered tension whenever he spoke. He had seen conflict during his earlier years in a city precinct, and those experiences had shaped his belief that fear often spoke louder than truth if no one pushed back. The wooden benches filled quickly. People brushed snow from their sleeves and stamped their feet to shake away the cold. Whispered conversations floated through the room, and nearly all of them circled around the same topic: the tower on the hill, the strange man, the eyesore, the danger. Mayor Collins raised his hand, and the room grew quiet. He cleared his throat in a way that suggested he valued the attention he was about to receive. He began speaking slowly, pacing with intention as if delivering a well-rehearsed argument. He described the coming plans for Riverton, mentioning winter cabins and tourist accommodations that could bring new revenue. He spoke of modernizing the town, creating an attractive destination, and removing old structures that did not fit the vision. His voice grew firmer when he mentioned the water tower, calling it outdated and unsafe, a blot on the white beauty of winter. People nodded. Some murmured agreement. A few glanced toward the frosted windows, imagining the dark silhouette of the tower against the snow, a lonely figure on a hill that always seemed to watch the town. The quiet unease that many of them carried about Adam Walker found shape in the mayor's words. The mayor continued, telling them how the tower's steel legs were rusted, how storms could weaken the old structure, how children might wander there out of curiosity. His tone implied concern for safety, though beneath it lingered his ambition to reshape Riverton into something closer to his own image. Jack Morgan rose to speak. His boots thudded on the wooden floor, and he planted himself with broad shoulders squared. He spoke of how the tower gave him an uneasy feeling every time he saw it on the snowy ridge. He described Adam as distant and strange, a man who worked quietly but never stayed to talk. In Jack's voice, there was something sharper than fear. There was irritation at the existence of anything that did not fit neatly into the daily rhythm he knew. He said the tower made the hill look haunted in winter, and that the town had a responsibility to keep Riverton presentable. Whispers strengthened. A few people agreed with him aloud. Others kept their opinions quiet, but nodded. Winter always intensified suspicion. The isolation of cold months made people look outward for reasons they felt uncomfortable inside their own lives. Sheriff Lewis stepped forward at last. His voice was calm but firm. He reminded the room that Adam Walker was a veteran who had served honorably. He explained that Adam owned the land and the tower legally, and that he had never caused trouble. He told them that Adam kept to himself, not because he was dangerous, but because he struggled with the memories he carried. The sheriff chose his words carefully, for he understood the weight they held. He said that the man living on that snowy hill had seen more hardship than most of them could imagine, and that judgment born from distance was no judgment at all. The room shifted uneasily. Some looked down. A few frowned, but did not argue. Others crossed their arms, caught between their concern and the sheriff's steady logic. The mayor tried to regain the momentum of the discussion by insisting they focus on progress. The sheriff did not raise his voice. He simply held his ground with quiet strength. People listened because they respected him, even when they disagreed. But suspicion ran deep in winter. The town was small and rumors traveled faster than wind. The cold season often magnified stories in the same way snow magnified light. Some feared the unknown. Others disliked anything that disrupted their sense of normalcy. And so, even with the sheriff defending him, most still looked at Adam with doubt. As the meeting continued, Collins talked of future plans. Jack repeated concerns about safety. Others added small comments about the tower looking unsettling in winter fog. Each word pushed Adam further into the role of outsider, yet Adam himself never knew this meeting was happening. He was on his hill, working with Buddy nearby, unaware of the voices below, deciding what to do with the place he called home. When the meeting finally ended, people buttoned their coats and stepped out into the bitter air. Snowflakes drifted softly, clinging to scarves and hats. The town returned to its quiet rhythm, but the tension remained beneath the surface. The idea to remove the tower had taken hold like frost in the grain of wood, and the man in the tower continued to live his quiet life unaware of the growing pressure. In the dimming afternoon, the sheriff lingered near the hall door. He looked up toward the hill where the tower stood faint against the gray winter sky. His breath misted in the air as he stood thinking. He respected Adam. He knew the man kept to himself because silence was sometimes the only space where broken memories could settle. He knew that people rarely understood those who carried invisible wounds. The sheriff felt a quiet worry. He sensed the tide of opinion shifting and wondered how long Adam could remain untouched by it. He pulled his coat tighter and walked back toward his office through the snow-packed street. Behind him, the hill and the tower rose like a lone figure carved out of winter. The coming days would reveal how far the town was willing to go. For now, the ridge remained still, the snow heavy, and the distance between Adam and the town below growing wider with each cold breath of wind. Winter held the old water tower in a hard and unyielding grip. Snow pressed thick against the curved metal walls, and the wind circled the structure with a hollow voice that seemed to echo through the steel frame. The cold outside was sharp enough to cut into the smallest crack, and the night sky stayed a pale sheet of silver that reflected the bleak stillness across the frozen ridge. Inside the tower, Adam Walker sat at his workbench with a small lantern and a portable heater casting faint warmth into the circular room. He worked with careful hands on an old military radio set. The radio was a heavy square device with wires coiled like sleeping snakes along its side, and the metal surface still carried dents from long-forgotten impacts. Adam adjusted circuits with a delicate precision that came from years of battle maintenance. His fingers were steady and controlled even when the sound of the wind rose sharply and made the lantern flame tremble. Adam's face was solemn as he leaned closer to the radio. The cold left a reddish tint across his cheeks, and the scar near his jaw appeared deeper in the shifting light. His memories were never quiet in winter. The cold reminded him of harsh nights in open desert when the temperature dropped without mercy and the radios crackled with sounds of distress. He had spent long nights then, listening to garbled voices calling through static. Sometimes the memories came back as short bursts of noise that seemed to slip between the gusts of wind outside the tower. In those moments, Adam felt the same helplessness that had settled inside him many years ago. He closed his eyes for a moment and listened to the wind pressing itself against the tower. The noise merged with flashes in his mind. He heard distant shouts that were not real. He heard the short buzz of a signal that did not exist. The sensation tightened his chest. Memories came in fragments, like broken glass scattered inside him. He breathed slowly and opened his eyes again. Buddy sensed it instantly. The dog lay only a few feet away on his thick blanket, but lifted his head the moment Adam's breath shifted. Buddy rose and walked toward him with slow, careful steps. His coat was thick and full, a mix of black and warm tan that looked almost golden in the lantern light. His ears were tall and alert, and his eyes held a warm amber glow that softened the cold of the room. Buddy pressed his head gently against Adam's leg, offering silent comfort that required no words. Adam rested a hand on the dog's neck. The warmth of Buddy's fur grounded him. The steady rise and fall of Buddy's breath drew him back to the present. In the silence that followed, Adam continued his work as the dog remained beside him. Buddy had always sensed his moods with uncanny accuracy. Sometimes Adam wondered if the dog recognized the same rhythm of fear and calm that had once pulsed through the hearts of men during long nights of war. When the radio was finally repaired, Adam placed it aside and stood up. The lantern flickered and cast a dim circle of light across the inside of the tower. The air was cold and thin. Adam pulled on his coat, a heavy brown piece with worn fabric and stitching that he had mended many times. The coat felt familiar, almost like armor. He walked toward the door, and Buddy followed with his tail low but attentive. Outside, the snow stretched in every direction. The ground was covered in a soft, uneven sheet of white, and small drifts curled along the base of the tower. Adam stepped into the snow and his boots sank slightly. The cold air bit into his skin, but he did not flinch. Winter was something he had learned to endure long before he came to Riverton. Buddy trotted beside him, leaving deep prints in the soft powder. Adam carried a small tool pouch in his gloved hand. Tonight, he planned to train Buddy, as he always did, on nights when the wind was too sharp and the world too silent. Training kept his mind focused on tasks rather than memories. It also strengthened the bond between him and the dog, who had become more than a companion. Buddy was his partner, his guardian, and the one presence that made long winter nights bearable. He walked a short distance from the tower and stopped near a cluster of snow-covered rocks where the wind did not hit as directly. He dropped a small wrench into the snow and stepped back several paces. Buddy sat down, waiting for a signal. Adam raised his right hand. Buddy watched with total focus. Adam made a slight motion with his wrist. The dog rose immediately, moved forward with confident steps, and lowered his nose to the snow. It did not take him long to find the wrench buried beneath the cold surface. Buddy gripped it carefully in his mouth and returned to Adam. The dog placed it gently in his gloved hand and sat again, ears forward as if waiting for further instruction. Adam nodded with quiet approval. His chest loosened slightly. Training had a rhythm that soothed him. It was the same rhythm he had used years ago when he trained younger soldiers or worked with military dogs during rescue operations. He dropped another tool, this time farther away and partially hidden by deeper snow. Buddy bounded off with strong movements, his fur shifting with each stride. The winter air carried the sound of his paws pressing into crusted snow. Adam observed him with a small trace of warmth in his eyes. Buddy searched methodically, weaving between rocks and sniffing along drifts until he found the object. He returned again with quiet pride in his stance. As the training session continued, Adam's mind grew calmer. The faint echoes of old battles faded beneath the steady certainty of Buddy's actions. Each successful task built a small but steady reassurance inside him. Buddy was dependable. Buddy understood. The presence of the dog reminded him that he did not face the long nights alone. When the cold deepened and the wind shifted direction, Adam signaled Buddy to end the exercise. Together, they walked back to the tower. Snow brushed against their boots and paws, and the darkness settled thickly around them. Inside the tower, the slight warmth from the heater greeted them. Buddy circled once on his blanket before lying down. Adam removed his gloves and rubbed his hands together to bring back the feeling. His eyes drifted toward the radio he had repaired earlier. The wind outside continued to howl, but Adam felt more steady now. Buddy had anchored him again. The dog lifted his head slightly, as if sensing Adam's gaze before lowering it to rest. Adam sat near the stove and allowed the silence to settle. He understood that the night would bring more memories. Winter always made them sharper. But he also knew that he could face them as long as Buddy remained near. The tower was small. The winter was harsh. The memories were heavy. Yet in the quiet space created between man and dog, there lived a form of strength that kept him standing. Adam knew that Buddy was not just a companion. He was the living reminder that even in the coldest season, warmth could still be found. Winter clouds thickened across the valley, as if the sky itself were preparing to close over Riverton. Snow lay heavy on the rooftops, and the air carried an icy weight that deepened with each passing hour. The wind drifted in long, steady waves that brushed against the hills and left a soft moan lingering in the cold air. Everything in the landscape felt slow and muted, as though the world were waiting for something it could not yet see. Inside the old water tower, Adam Walker sat at his narrow desk, with the radio turned low. The radio crackled with faint static and broken voices that rose and fell like distant whispers. He leaned closer to it, adjusting the small knobs with practiced motions. His face was tense and his brow furrowed, the scar near his jaw drawing a pale line under the lantern light. He listened, not with curiosity, but with the instinct of a man trained to hear danger in signals others ignored. The voice from the radio was strained by interference. Adam followed the fragments of weather reports described with calm, monotone precision. The station repeated warnings about a storm forming over the northern plains, a winter system gathering speed and mass, a cold front pushing south without slowing. Words like heavy snowfall, low visibility, and power disruption were spoken in clipped segments that sharpened Adam's attention. Then came the phrase that settled heavily into his thoughts. Historic blizzard conditions expected. The message was clear, even through the distortion. Something large was coming toward Riverton. Adam sat back slowly, letting the information settle inside him. His eyes drifted toward the window of the tower, where frost clung to the edges and dim light leaked through the white haze. He felt a familiar tightening in his chest. Not panic, not fear. Something deeper. The instinct that had kept him alive during long nights overseas. The instinct that whispered when danger approached, even before eyes could find it. Buddy lifted his head from the blanket near the stove. The dog watched Adam with alert amber eyes. His ears were upright and still. He sensed the change in Adam's breathing. Adam glanced down at him and gave a slow nod, as if confirming what Buddy already understood. The quiet life they had built here often depended on preparedness. And now, the storm approaching felt like a shadow growing across the valley. Adam rose from his chair and pulled on his coat. The fabric was worn and softened by years of use. He zipped it slowly, steadying his mind with the rhythmic motion. He picked up a list he kept tucked beneath the radio. A checklist he had written long ago for moments like this. He scanned it once and moved toward the metal stairs leading to the lower level. Buddy followed with disciplined steps. His paws made soft clicks on the steel floor. Adam opened the lower door, and cold air swept inside immediately. The wind cut across his face and brought a rush of sharp winter scent. Adam stepped out and surveyed the generator shed standing beside the tower. Snow had drifted halfway up the sides. He brushed frost from the latch and opened the door. Inside the shed, the generator sat like a slumbering giant. A thick machine with a faded green casing, dented panels, and a sturdy base anchored deep into the cement floor. Adam checked the fuel lines, tightened the clamps, inspected the belts, and brushed frost from the vents. He moved with calm precision, thinking through each task before completing it. His fingers tingled from the cold, but he continued until he was certain the machine would endure a prolonged power loss. He checked the fuel reserves in the metal containers stacked along the wall and counted them twice. Enough for several days if used carefully, enough to keep him and Buddy warm and supplied. From the ridge, he could see the town. Riverton sat quietly beneath the soft white blanket, unaware of the danger gathering beyond the horizon. Thin curls of smoke rose from chimneys. Lights glowed softly through frosted windows. Nothing in the peaceful scene below hinted at urgency. Adam knew better. Winter could turn from calm to catastrophic faster than most people believed. He carried several jugs of water inside the tower and filled the storage barrels he kept near the corner. He checked the canned goods and dried food he stored on metal shelves. He counted what was needed for both himself and Buddy. As he moved through the tasks, memories surfaced of long nights overseas when supply drops were late and the cold had bitten his hands until they bled. He shook the memory away. This was different. This was Riverton. This was home now, even if the town did not truly see him as part of it. But he stayed close, watching his every movement. When Adam nodded, Buddy walked to the door and waited for commands. Adam signaled with two brief motions of his hand. Buddy stepped out into the snow and paced around the tower. He scanned the area with alert posture, ears pricked, tail steady. The dog was checking the perimeter in a habit learned through years at Adam's side. Adam felt a quiet comfort watching him. The storm may have been large and threatening, but he had faced worse with less. As Adam secured the final window latch upstairs, he paused for a moment to look out again toward the valley. Snow lifted in curls along the roof lines below. The trees swayed slightly in the wind. Riverton carried on its routines unaware. Adam imagined the people moving through the streets. He pictured them buying groceries, greeting neighbors, brushing snow from their steps. Many of them had lived through countless winters. To them, bad weather was simply part of life in this valley. And because they had survived so many storms before, they believed they would survive the next. Adam knew that belief could be dangerous. Down in Riverton, the streets were brighter than usual for a winter afternoon. People gathered outside the diner and the general store. Among them, Sheriff Lewis walked slowly down the sidewalk. He carried a worried look that stood out against the usual calm expression he wore. His stride was thoughtful and deliberate. The cold made his breath puff softly against the air. Lewis was not a man who panicked easily. Years of service in the city police force had shaped him into someone who read danger before it struck. Today, he felt the same unsettling pull he had felt during past emergencies. He stopped outside the town hall, where Mayor Collins stood, speaking with a group of residents. The mayor wore a thick coat, buttoned high at the collar, and a confident smile. His voice carried across the snow-lined steps. He told the townspeople that the storm reports were exaggerated. He said winter always came with warnings, and that Riverton was strong enough to handle anything nature dropped on them. He spoke of caution, but in the same breath dismissed worry as needless. Lewis approached him with a slow, measured step. The mayor turned and greeted him with a nod. Lewis explained that the weather front was stronger than typical storms, and that the town hall should be prepared as a shelter if needed. He spoke plainly, outlining the risk of losing power and the importance of warming stations. But the mayor waved him off with polite dismissal. He said the town had endured dozens of storms and that people did not need unnecessary alarms during winter. Lewis looked at the group around him. Some smiled politely. Others shrugged. Most seemed unconcerned. The sheriff felt a familiar frustration slowly coil inside him. Not anger, not impatience, a kind of quiet dread. He had seen what complacency looked like in moments before real danger struck, and Riverton was walking straight into complacency. When he stepped away, the mayor resumed his reassuring tone. The townspeople drifted back to their errands without worry. The snow continued to fall in soft drifting waves. Lights glowed in the shop windows as if nothing at all had changed. Back on the hill, Adam tightened the last bolt on the generator panel and stepped inside the tower. Buddy followed him with a low wag of his tail. Adam placed tools back into their crate and looked around the room with calm readiness. The storm would come. He did not know how soon, but he knew he was prepared. And he knew that even if no one else believed the warnings carried by the radio, he could not ignore them. Winter deepened across the ridge. The sky darkened. The wind stretched its long voice across the metal tower. Adam sat with Buddy near the small stove, listening to the storm gathering strength far beyond the valley. The world outside felt colder than usual, but inside, they waited with quiet vigilance, ready for whatever approached from the north. Winter reached its fiercest moment as the storm descended upon Riverton. The sky had turned into a swirling sheet of white, and the valley disappeared under waves of falling snow. Wind tore across rooftops with a sharp, angry cry, and the world seemed to shrink under the weight of the storm. It was as if the entire landscape had been erased and replaced with cold silence shaped by the force of nature. In the early hours of the storm, the snow fell in thick layers that blurred the shapes of houses and fence lines. Before long, the roads were buried under a dense blanket that climbed higher with each passing minute. Trees bent under the weight. Branches cracked. Roof shingles rattled as wind clawed at them with relentless strength. Riverton had faced many winters, but nothing in recent memory felt as heavy as this blizzard. It pressed against every door and window. It swallowed every familiar path in white. Inside his home at the edge of town, Jack Barnes paced between the kitchen and the small living room. Jack was a wide-shouldered man in his 50s, with a rough beard and thick hands shaped by years of hauling lumber and working outdoors. His skin held a reddish tone from constant exposure to cold winters, and his movements were usually strong and confident. But tonight, the storm had stripped that confidence from him. His breath was tense and uneven. His heavy boots left marks in the snow tracked across the entryway. The windows of his home were completely covered by snow from the outside, and the interior lights reflected back at him as if he were standing inside a closed wooden box. In the bedroom beyond the hall lay his young son Tommy. The boy was 9 years old, with pale skin and thin brown hair. He had always been smaller than children his age, due to a history of respiratory issues. When healthy, he was gentle and quiet, with a warm smile. But tonight, his breathing had grown strained. A faint wheeze rose from his small chest each time he inhaled. Jack stood over him, with helpless fear twisting inside his stomach. He had hoped the illness earlier in the week would fade. Instead, the cold air of the storm had made it worse. The power failed shortly after the wind reached its highest pitch. The heater stopped. The refrigerator fell silent. The single lamp in the living room flickered once and died. Darkness rolled through the house like a heavy curtain. Jack lit a small lantern, but the dim glow barely reached the corners of the room. He picked up his landline phone, but the device stayed silent. He tried his mobile phone and found only a blank screen where the signal bar should have been. Snow and wind had severed all connections. The house felt sealed away from the world as if buried under ice. Sheriff Lewis moved through the snow-covered streets with a sense of urgency pressing at his chest. His coat was layered with frost, and his hat was weighed down by snow. He was a tall man with calm features, but the storm had carved lines of concern across his face. Lewis had spent most of the evening going door to door, checking on families and elderly residents until the roads became impassable. Thick snow reached nearly to his knees. Wind pushed hard against his back. The cold dug into his bones. He eventually reached the sheriff's office, a small brick building near the center of town. Inside, it was dim and cold. The power had cut there as well. He moved through the quiet rooms with slow steps. His breath formed clouds in the air. He reached the equipment room and began checking every device available. A radio sat on the table. Another set was mounted on the wall. A portable unit lay in its charging dock. He tried each one. Static. Only static. A broken whisper of noise that offered no answers and no reach beyond the storm. Lewis rubbed his forehead and tried again. He adjusted knobs. He switched channels. Nothing changed. The storm had swallowed all transmissions. The sound of static crackled through the small office like distant dry leaves scraping across the floor. Beneath that noise, he could hear the faint rattle of wind pushing against the windows. He reached for the mobile phone in his pocket. No signal, no network. He set it down and exhaled slowly. He felt the isolation settle around him. Riverton was cut off completely. A sharp knocking came at the front door. Jack Barnes stepped in with snow clinging heavily to his shoulders. His face was pale and lined with fear. He explained in a strained voice that Tommy was struggling to breathe. His words were uneven, and he kept glancing toward the storm outside, as if expecting the wind to steal the sound from his mouth. Lewis listened carefully and placed a steady hand on Jack's shoulder. The sheriff remained calm, but the weight in his chest grew heavier. Lewis returned to the radios, trying each one again with a methodical desperation he rarely allowed himself to feel. His fingers trembled slightly. Static, only static. He tried to reach emergency services outside the valley. Nothing responded. The storm pressed down on them with a silence that felt absolute. He stepped toward the narrow window of the sheriff's office. Snow blew past in frantic spirals, and the night sky blended with the ground until no horizon remained. He wiped the frost with his glove and squinted toward the hills. Most of the town was buried in darkness. Houses that usually glowed with yellow light were now shadows smothered under white. The entire valley was quiet. Too quiet. Then his eyes caught something faint. A point of light shining through the storm far up on the ridge. A small, warm gleam in the distance. A single beacon in a world swallowed by white. The water tower. Adam's tower. The only place with light. The only place untouched by the blackout that held the town in silence. Lewis pressed his hand against the glass. Hope sparked beneath his worry. Adam had prepared. Adam had listened. While the town had dismissed the warning, Adam had made himself ready. And now that readiness stood like a lantern in the storm. Lewis turned toward Jack with renewed purpose. The storm was strong. Roads were blocked. Communications were down. But the light on the hill meant someone was awake. Someone equipped. Someone who might have a way to help. And in that moment, Lewis knew where he needed to go. Snowfall covered the entire hill in a thick and unmoving blanket as dawn barely touched the horizon. The storm had slowed, but the cold remained sharp enough to bite through any layer of cloth. The wind carried a low rumble across the valley, and everything below the ridge was hidden under drifting waves of white. The sky held a muted gray color, like steel cooled under ice. Adam stood near the small, reinforced window of the tower. His breath formed faint clouds as he watched the distant lights emerging through the snowy haze. He had been awake since the moment the generator kicked on for its routine cycle. His mind had carried the weight of uncertainty through the night. Buddy lay beside him at first, with quiet breaths, but lifted his head when Adam stepped closer to the window. A soft motion passed between them, as if they shared the same instinct that something had changed. Through the glass, Adam noticed a pulse of yellow light flickering below the ridgeline. It was moving slowly, too slowly. He reached for his field binoculars on the workbench. The cold metal pressed lightly against his hands as he raised them. The blurred shape sharpened. A vehicle. The sheriff truck. Its headlights were trapped in a small circle of swirling snow. The truck was angled slightly, but not moving. When Adam lowered the binoculars, he felt the familiar tightening in his stomach, a sense of duty that never truly left him. Years in uniform had carved a response into his mind long before words came to him. He stepped to the workbench and took a small waterproof pouch from the drawer. His handwriting was steady as he wrote the message. Snowpacked, vehicle stuck, tell status, send in Buddy. Adam placed the paper into the pouch and sealed it with slow pressure. Then he turned to Buddy. Buddy was a strong German shepherd with a thick winter coat of dark and lighter shades blending across his frame. His ears stood alert when Adam called his name. The dog was 7 years old and carried the endurance of a working animal trained with patience and respect. His eyes held a deep amber color, and they locked onto Adam with a calm readiness that came from years of disciplined tasks. Adam crouched to fix the pouch to Buddy's collar. His fingers brushed against the warm fur beneath the cold air. He spoke in a low, steady tone. Buddy understood commands shaped not only from words, but from the rhythm of Adam's breath and posture. A quiet moment passed between them, an unspoken trust. Adam opened the heavy metal door, and the cold wind rushed inside like a wave of needles. Snowflakes whipped across the threshold. Buddy stepped forward first, then paused, waiting for Adam's signal. Adam gave a single firm motion of his hand. Go. Buddy leaped into the storm. The snow outside rose nearly to Buddy's chest. Each stride sent a burst of powder into the air. The wind clawed at him and pushed sideways with sudden gusts. His breath came out in small, sharp clouds. He lowered his head against the cold and followed the faint scent of diesel lingering in the air. That scent blended with a familiar metallic note of cold engine heat far away. Buddy had learned to track through harsh conditions, and the storm could not erase everything. Adam watched from the doorway for a moment, until Buddy disappeared into the thick white curtain. He stepped back inside, closing the door slowly. A silent heaviness settled in his chest. He stood for a long minute listening to the distant roar of the wind. The tower felt larger and emptier without Buddy. The hollow echo of his boots on the concrete floor brought back memories he tried not to hold. His thoughts turned toward the sheriff, toward the stranded vehicle, toward the need that had driven someone up the hill. And with each thought came another layer of tension that pushed against his calm. Buddy moved with determination through the deep slopes. Snow piled into uneven ridges, making some steps heavy and painful. His paws sank deep, and he had to pull himself forward with powerful movements. The wind pressed ice against his face. His thick coat collected flakes that froze near the surface. Every few strides he paused to read the world with his senses. The faint hum of an engine carried through the snow. He shifted direction, slightly aiming toward that sound. Sometimes the drifts rose higher than his head. He would dig quickly, pushing Snow aside with sharp strokes of his paws. His breath grew harder, but he kept moving. The memory of Adam's hand fastening the pouch around his collar served as a clear signal in his instinct. He had done tasks like this before during training. Retrieve, deliver, return. Those ideas shaped his focus as much as scent and sound did. After a long struggle, he caught sight of a dark shape ahead. The outline of the sheriff truck sat buried halfway into a drift. Its headlights glowed weakly through the swirling snow. Buddy barked once, but the wind swallowed the sound. He pushed forward until his body struck against the metal door. Snow scattered from his fur. Inside the cab, Sheriff Lewis sat with tightened shoulders. Frost clung to the edges of the windshield. His jaw was clenched as he tried to conserve heat while watching the storm swirling around the stuck vehicle. When he heard the thump, he froze for a moment. The sound came again. A scraping. Then a muffled whine. Lewis leaned closer to the window and wiped away part of the frost with his sleeve. Through the small patch of clear glass, he saw the amber eyes and snow-covered head of Buddy. Shock and relief collided inside him. He pushed the door open just enough for Buddy to slip through. The cold air knifed inside, but he ignored it. Buddy shook snow from his coat and pressed himself against the sheriff's leg. His breath was warm in contrast to the freezing air. Lewis knelt to check Buddy's collar and found the waterproof pouch. His gloved fingers struggled with the clasp, but finally opened it. He unfolded the message and read the words with a heavy breath. Adam had seen them. Adam understood. A path forward existed. Lewis looked at Buddy with newfound hope. The dog stood steady and alert, as if waiting for the next command. The sheriff placed a firm hand on Buddy's shoulder. A silent thank you passed through the gesture. For the first time since the storm trapped the town, a spark of direction cut through the uncertainty. Snow continued to fall in slow, heavy sheets as the storm settled deeper into Riverton. The wind pushed long trails of white across the empty streets, and every roof bowed under the weight. The entire town looked frozen, as if locked inside a silent winter shell. The air held a dry, cutting cold that seeped through fabric and stung exposed skin. Night pressed down on the valley in thick gray layers. Sheriff Lewis guided the patrol truck through the snow-covered road with intense focus. Buddy sat beside him, resting but alert, his breath forming faint clouds in the frigid cabin. Lewis held the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles pale under the strain. His jaw was still tense from the cold and from the weight of responsibility that pushed against him with every minute. The truck engine strained as it crawled back toward the sheriff's office. By the time Lewis reached the station, the building was half buried behind snowdrifts. Ice clung to the doorframe, and a thick white crust covered the windows. He stepped out of the vehicle with slow, stiff movements. His boots sank deep into the snow, and the air around him burned with cold. Buddy followed him closely, staying near his leg with a steady posture. Inside the office, the air was still and dim. The lantern he had left earlier cast a small glow across the main room. The cold bit into his fingers as he reached for the radio equipment. Lewis moved quickly despite the cold. He dragged the patrol truck radio unit to the main desk, set it down, and connected the cable to the tall antenna line fixed along the wall. Each movement felt crucial. Every second felt heavier than the one before. He sat before the radio and adjusted the knobs. A burst of static filled the room. The sound was sharp and grating but familiar. It was the same static that had answered him for hours earlier. Lewis took a deep breath and pressed the transmit button. Calling Adam Walker. This is Sheriff Lewis. Respond if you can. Over. He lifted his finger from the button. Static surged and faded. Buddy stood close behind him, ears raised. The cold of the room wrapped around them both. Then through the static a voice emerged. Calm. Steady. Clear. Sheriff Lewis, I read you clearly. Go ahead. Lewis felt a surge of relief that flowed through him like sudden warmth. Adam's voice carried a quiet authority, the tone of a man who had learned long ago to remain steady when the world around him was falling apart. Lewis leaned closer to the microphone. Adam. We have a medical emergency. Tommy Barnes. Breathing trouble. Severe. Adam replied without hesitation. I need the child age. Breathing rate. Skin color. Any fever. Give everything precisely. Lewis relayed the information in a low, controlled voice. He spoke slowly, as if each detail carried weight between life and death. Buddy sat beside him quietly. His gaze never shifted. Adam wrote down the details in the tower, his movements steady and exact. The wind rattled against the metal walls, but he remained focused. His training echoed through him, not in memory, but in muscle. He turned a dial, and the radio crackled again. He shifted frequency, then another, searching, listening. Adam knew storms like this crush signals, bending them into noise. But beneath that noise, patterns still existed, faint threads of communication that could be pulled into clarity with enough skill and patience. He sat rigid at the bench, with eyes calm and precise. He tuned the dials by micrometers. Static swelled, then thinned. Then a faint tone cut through. He leaned closer. Another tone followed. A distant voice moved behind the static. Adam narrowed the frequency again. His hand was steady. This is Federal Rescue Channel responding to emergency call. Identify. Lewis heard Adam's voice come back to him. Clear, focused, direct. The tone of someone who had stepped into command without hesitation. Sheriff, I have contact. Stay silent while I relay. Lewis pressed his lips together and nodded, even though Adam could not see him. Buddy shifted slightly closer to his boot, as if sensing the shift in mood. Adam spoke with precision. Civilian relay station in Riverton. Pediatric emergency. Need helicopter response. Condition critical. Wind severe. Visibility poor. The Federal Channel replied with a strain of static around its edges. Wind heavy. Blizzard disrupting signal. Provide coordinates. Provide landing details. Adam pressed his pencil to the notepad and adjusted the radio band again. He listened for the cleanest signal before responding. His breath remained steady. His thoughts moved in clear lines. Coordinates confirmed for Riverton. Landing zone high school field. Snow depth 2 feet. Ground stable. Lewis closed his eyes for a moment in the cold, dim room. Relief trembled through him. Hope surged like a spark in the endless winter dark. He glanced at Buddy, who remained steady, as if guarding the fragile thread of connection between tower and town. On the radio, Adam continued to give precise measurements and conditions. His tone carried the same firm calm as a field officer guiding a distant unit through danger. He instructed the helicopter team on approach angle and wind gusts. He corrected their heading twice. His voice never faltered. Meanwhile, Jack Barnes stood at the office doorway. Snow soaked his jacket. His face looked drained and pale. His eyes trembled with fear and guilt as he listened to Adam's voice through the radio. A man he once judged harshly. A man he once dismissed and feared without reason. Now this man was guiding a helicopter through a deadly storm to save Jack's son. Jack lowered his head. His breath shook. He had believed Adam was strange, a shadow on the hill, someone better avoided than understood. Now, in the cold, dim light of the sheriff's office, Jack felt the weight of his mistakes settle deep in his chest. He pressed a hand over his eyes. The guilt stung like the winter wind. In the tower, Adam stayed on frequency, guiding the pilots through the turbulence. At one point, the signal wavered. He shifted the dial with trained instinct, and the voice snapped back into clarity. Preparation and discipline flowed through him like the rhythm of breath. Finally, the pilot voice broke through with certainty. Visual on landing zone. Preparing descent. Adam replied with a calm, steady tone. Proceed. Riverton standing by. Lewis lowered the microphone slowly. Buddy leaned against his leg. The office fell into quiet, except for the faint hum of static. Outside, the storm still raged, but for the first time since the blizzard swallowed, the town hope had a voice. And that voice came from the lone light on the snowy hill. Morning broke through the storm with a muted silver light that spread gently across the snowy valley of Riverton. The blizzard had finally loosened its grip. Snow no longer fell in violent sheets, but drifted softly in thin, scattered flakes. The air remained painfully cold, and the wind carried the lingering echo of the long night. The world looked washed clean and silent under an unbroken blanket of white. Inside the tower, Adam stood near the window with a heavy weight in his chest. The helicopter had flown out before sunrise, carrying Tommy toward medical care. The sound of its rotors had faded into the distance like a promise that help was finally beyond the storm. But something else had faded with it. Buddy had not returned. Adam knew the dog had delivered the message to the sheriff. He knew Buddy had begun the return climb through the snow. But hours had passed with no sound of paws against the steps and no familiar scratch at the metal door. Adam moved back and forth across the tower floor. His boots echoed in the cold room. He kept glancing toward the heavy door, as if willing it to open. His breath grew uneven, and memories pressed hard against his thoughts. During his years in service, he had lost men he could not bring back. He had carried regret through winters far colder than Riverton. But the weight in his chest now felt sharper. Buddy was his constant companion, his grounding force. A reminder that even the hardest days had something steady to hold on to. He finally reached for his coat. The thick brown fabric slid over his shoulders as he grabbed gloves and pushed open the door. A painful burst of icy wind swept inside. Adam stepped out into the snow that reached nearly to his knees. The cold struck his face like a blade, but he barely felt it. His thoughts were fixed on the path down the hill. He shouted Buddy's name once. His voice cracked into the silent white and vanished. He started down the slope with long strides that forced him to push through deep drifts. The snow resisted every movement. His breath tightened. The air burned in his chest. But he kept moving. He scanned the tree line. He scanned the path the sheriff truck had taken. His eyes stung with cold and worry. Minutes dragged into something heavier. Each step felt louder than the last. The world around him stayed still. The silence wrapped around him thick as frost. His heart pounded harder with the fear he had not felt since combat. He pressed on. Then something shifted in the corner of his vision. A faint movement near the edge of the forest. A dark shape pushing against the snow. Adam stopped breathing for a moment. He stared. The shape moved again, stumbling, struggling. Buddy. Adam felt a wave of emotion crash into him. He pushed forward as fast as the snow allowed. Buddy emerged from the shadow of the trees. His coat was covered in frozen clumps. His right leg lifted slightly as he limped. His head hung low. But when his eyes found Adam, they brightened. His tail gave a weak but determined motion. Adam fell to his knees in the snow and wrapped his arms around Buddy. The dog pressed his head into Adam's chest with a soft whine. Adam held him tightly. The cold around them faded under the warmth of relief. Buddy's breath trembled against him. Adam felt the sting of tears, but did not look away. In that moment, Buddy was not just a dog. He was home. He was memory. He was the one steady presence that had kept Adam from falling into the deeper shadows of the past. After a long, still moment, Adam gathered Buddy into his arms and carried him back toward the tower. The climb was slow, but steady. Each step felt lighter than the last. When they reached the door, Adam pushed it open gently and laid Buddy on a thick blanket near the heater. He checked the injured paw with careful hands. Frostbite and strain, but nothing broken. Buddy rested his head down with a soft exhale. Adam stroked his fur with quiet gratitude. As the afternoon light stretched across the snow outside, Adam noticed shapes moving in the distance. A small cluster of figures made their way up the hill. The wind carried faint voices. He stood near the door, waiting as they came into clear view. Sheriff Lewis led the group. His coat was dusted with snow. His expression carried tired relief. Behind him was Dr. Finch. The doctor was a thin man with white hair and gentle eyes filled with gratitude. Beside him walked Jack Barnes. Jack's shoulders were heavy, and his face carried the weight of deep reflection. Behind them came several townspeople bundled in thick coats. When they reached the tower, Adam stepped outside. Buddy lifted his head weakly, but stayed on the blanket. The group stopped a few paces away. No one spoke for a moment. The cold air carried their breath into small, drifting clouds. Sheriff Lewis broke the silence first. He thanked Adam with a steady tone shaped by respect. Dr. Finch followed with words filled with emotion. Jack Barnes stepped forward last. He looked at Adam with humbled eyes. He spoke with a quiet regret. He admitted his earlier judgment, his fear, his mistakes. His voice trembled as he offered an apology born from the long night that had changed everything. Adam listened without interruption. His face remained calm, not hardened, not distant, simply present. Sheriff Lewis then explained the decision made that morning by the town council. A new plan, a new purpose. They wanted to establish an official emergency communication post in the tower. They wanted Adam to run it with full support from the town. Fuel, maintenance, compensation, supplies. Everything required to keep Riverton safe during winters ahead. What was once a lonely outpost would become a place of protection for everyone in the valley. Adam looked at their faces. He saw sincerity, gratitude, acceptance. He nodded slowly. The tension in his shoulders eased. Riverton had finally seen him not as a shadow on the hill, but as someone who stood ready when the storm came. Later, as the sun lowered behind the snowy ridge, the light from the tower glowed warm against the white landscape. It shone across the valley like a quiet beacon. With Buddy resting beside him, Adam stood near the window and looked down at Riverton. The town lights flickered back to life one by one. Winter still held the valley in its icy grip, but the storm had passed. The tower no longer felt like isolation. It felt like purpose. From that day forward, the old water tower on the snowy hill became the winter lighthouse of Riverton. And in its warm glow, Adam and Buddy found a home that no storm could take away. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, the people of Riverton came to understand something deeper than the fear they had carried. Adam and Buddy had stood alone on the snowy hill, yet their courage reached every home buried under winter. Their strength revealed that even the coldest season can bring people closer when they choose compassion over distance. The town discovered that community is not measured by how comfortable life is, but by how far a person will go to help another. Through struggle, Adam found belonging. Through hardship, the townspeople found humility. And through a single glowing tower in the snow, they all learned that hope can rise from the most unlikely places. Their winter had been harsh, but it shaped a bond that would last long after the snow melted. May this story remind each heart that miracles often begin with a single act of courage. May the gentle hand of God guide you through your own storms and bless your home with peace and warmth. If this journey touched you, please share your thoughts in the comments and share the story with someone who needs hope today. Remember to subscribe so you can walk with us through more stories of faith, kindness, and second chances. May God pour blessings over you and your family each day ahead.